The next and final one that I'll show you today is used often when you're doing a triangular shawl from the center down. So you'd cast on here and do things like this. Now, not every triangular shawl is worked this way, but a lot of them are. And there's also, with everything, there's a couple of ways to do this one too. This just happens to be the way I learned it, and it always worked for me. So I figure that's what I'll share with you. It's pretty simple. So when you cast on a shawl like this, they tell you to cast on like 3 stitches, something really minute, very small, and just do your good old backwards loop cast on. So I'm just going to cast on those 3 stitches, and then you work a row. Now what this is going to give you is this tiny little area of garter stitch, and you'll notice that the edge of many triangular shawls that are constructed in this way have the garter stitch edge. So this just becomes part of it. It becomes completely seamless. So now you have 3 stitches and your cast on edge. What you do next is, instead of turning around and going back to knit the other way, you pick up 3 stitches on the other side. So you're essentially creating sort of a little V like this. So I'm going to pick up those stitches. I'll probably do this kind of messy just to get it done fast. But hey, quick and dirty. No problem with that, right? So you just take your ends here, turn around, and knit your next little piece of a row. Now, if you were going to be doing something like socks, you could do the same thing, but you would need to start with half the amount of stitches that you would need eventually in your toe. And the cool thing about this is that it's kind of scalable. You can do it in the round, you can do it flat. In this case, it's actually done flat. So what you're doing is you're casting on a V instead of in the round. So I think I've got it there. Okay, so now I've got 6 stitches. I've just picked up 3 from the cast on, and I'm ready to go. So the next step, you're like, okay, so I've got this weird little blob here. What on earth do I do with that? The next step is actually to pick up 1 stitch, and this can be a little tricky, from between these 2 legs. And what I would recommend is just using one of the existing needles. Now this is a lot easier to do on circular needles or smaller DPNs. You can start off with DPNs on something like this and move to circulars if you prefer them. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want to use straight needles, but anything else is fine. So you just have to kind of quick and dirty pick up a stitch, or you could just increase 1 into the first stitch on the next row, essentially, as long as you have that extra stitch. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to knit in the front and back of the first stitch here. The pattern will usually tell you how to do that. And then knit to the end of this row. And then you turn and you knit back the other way. So now I've got 7 stitches here on 2 needles, which again would be a little bit easier if it was circulars, but just for demonstration's sake. You then purl back or knit back. So in this case I'm going to knit back because it's a garter border, except for that center stitch, because that center stitch is the beginning of your shawl. So usually you'll have a row of yarn overs around your center stitch. So there's your center guy right there. I'm just going to do a yarn over, and of course I go drop it. Beautiful thing about knitting, you just put it right back on. So you do a yarn over, you knit that central stitch, do another yarn over, and then knit back. So there's my yarn over. That's another reason why it's a little easier to do this with circular needles. So, all right. Get that over there. Okay, there we go. So you've got this tiny, tiny little shawl starting here. Now this is another one where I would suggest, if you haven't done anything like this, because it can get really fiddly, try it a couple times before you actually cast on. If you have a nice, soft, big, fat yarn to practice with, just so you can kind of get the anatomy of it. But if I take this off the needle, what you're going to see is a little triangle And there's 2 yarn overs right here. So this little section of garter stitch is going to extend this way, and the shawl is going to build this way in ever increasing triangle sizes. So that's kind of the quick and dirty way of doing a cast on for this. There's a bunch of different variations. You can knit a longer piece of garter stitch and then pick up across the bottom. It just depends on what your comfort level is and how fiddly you like to be. This is the cast on that I've used before, and I'm comfortable with it. And you just pick whatever you're most comfortable with, but as long as it's something that's very appropriate to what you're knitting. So you wouldn't use a circular cast on for something like this because it's going to give you a very funky little belly button at the top of your shawl, and likewise, you wouldn't use that kind of sideways garter stitch cast on for a straight shawl. So that's pretty much the skinny on casting on. There are some little variations on those 3, but those are the basic ones you'll need to know.